Meeting to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Kennedy.
Here.
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderwoman Howard.
Present.
Alderman Arnowitz.
Here.
Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Murphy. Alderman Ogilvy. Alderwoman Navarro.
Here.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Here.
Chairman Vaccaro.
Present.
8 present. You have a quorum.
Okay, we're going to talk about Board Bill 194, and if the sponsor would go ahead and come on up to the front there. And Vice Chairman and young Vice Chairman is here. And yes, Alderman Ogilvy's here. And we're not going to take a vote tonight, although I do believe we will at the next meeting.
I'd appreciate that. I understand that we want to get through the testimony and let everybody speak their mind with this. First thing I'd like to say is that I would like to thank the committee for bringing this before you this evening and the public for showing up and being willing to participate in this process. Board Bill 194 will bring before the voters of the City of St. Louis an amendment to the Charter of the City of St. Louis that will allow all city employees to live within certain boundaries, but not be qualified or not be required to live within the boundaries of the City of St. Louis. That's all city employees. Right now, as head of the Public Employees Committee, it was brought to me in a meeting with Mr. Franks that we're having a hard time filling positions, and anybody that actually looks at the job postings on the City of St. Louis website, many of them have been there for quite some time. And part of the reason is because if people apply, they're required to relocate into the City of St. Louis. Many times that's a big ask for people that are maybe taking a job for $30,000 or $40,000 on a job they may or may not be dedicated to, or maybe just not willing to take up the banner to move and relocate. Again, we have many loyal employees in the city that live here, work here, and are really happy to be in the City of St. Louis. And I think that requiring them to live here is sort of a indentured servitude attitude and an old way of thinking about employment. So with that said, I'd just like the people to consider this, and I'd like to put this before the voters. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Richard Frank, Director of Personnel, to give his testimony as to why he believes this bill is a good thing for the City of St. Louis and its citizens. Thank you. Mr. Richard Frank.
Thank you, honorable members of the committee. I've worked here for 14 years now, and really what we've seen is, I would call a post-Ferguson effect, where it's been more difficult to recruit and retain all sorts of civil service positions. We go to a number of different job fairs. We go to Senator Clay's job fair, we go to Ferguson 1000, we go to Rolla, we go all over the place. And what we've experienced is that 35 to 40% of the time when people say they are not interested in city employment, the reason is because they say they either cannot or will not relocate. What we've seen with a lot of the downturn in market values outside of the City of St. Louis is people may have their houses with their mortgage underwater, or they may simply not be able to afford the rents in the city, etc. Alderwoman Howard is correct. Within 120 days, I think I'm standing too close there, within 120 days of completing your working test period, if you are a full-time city employee, you have to reside within the corporate city limits. This has resulted in about 30 to 40 positions that we routinely have difficulty recruiting from. One of the things that I've shared with Alderwoman Howard is a listing, a survey that we've prepared of what other major cities and municipalities, counties do. And I think when you review that, if Alderwoman Howard will share that, you'll see that the vast majority of cities and counties have abandoned this requirement. Courts themselves don't even like residency requirements. It's a very high standard of proof in order to take disciplinary action against someone who does not meet the residency requirement. And we believe that this is a big challenge for a number of our different positions. We also have currently, and this is a little complex, but a different standard that is required for some city employees. Police officers, or actually employees of the police department who were hired prior to 9/113, are allowed to move outside the city after they've lived in the city for 7 years. So you have that standard. Then there's one for the firefighters, and that is that if the school system in the city is either accredited or unaccredited or provisionally accredited, within a 5-year period of time, they can move outside the city. They would not be required to move back if the schools become accredited, which they have, but after 7 years of working for the fire department. And this is not just for uniformed firefighters. This is for a clerk typist too. So if you're fortunate enough to be a clerk typist too, I guess, in the fire department, you have your choice of where you live after working for the fire department for 7 years. But if you are an employee of, let's say, personnel or of the law department and you're a clerk typist too, you must maintain the residency requirement. That raises some concerns for me about Equal Protection Act, equal protection under the law when you start treating different employees differently. But we believe that based on the communication we have had with a number of different people, with our labor unions, with our constituents, with our people that we participate in job fairs with, that probably the residency requirement is the single biggest impediment to getting fully staffed. And we feel it desperately in certain positions, particularly with the police officer trainees. You know, we're down right now about 130 commissioned officers. I know the board has heard discussions about, possible pay raises, which it can consider, and we're doing the things that we can to advertise and recruit. But I would be disingenuous if I didn't say that the residency requirement is the single biggest handicap for us in terms of recruiting qualified candidates.
Thank you. Have you brought any other people along with you to give testimony?
I don't really have anybody in specific other than my recruitment examination manager, Brian Beckelman, could probably testify also about the types of vacancies that we have or his direct feedback when he goes to the job fairs, if you'd like to hear from him.
Yes, I would like to.
Thank you, Director and board members. I've worked in Mr. Frank's recruitment and examination section for over 12 years now, as a specialist and now as his exams manager. And I can testify to what I can only call the Ferguson effect. Around 14, I noticed a sharp decline in the number of qualified applicants we were receiving for a variety of jobs. We've had positions, professional positions like Accountant 1 and an Accountant 2 open until further notice for the better part of a year now. We're not getting the amount of qualified candidates we used to. We've taken every reasonable step we can think of in-house to review our requirements for our positions. One position we struggle with in particular, heavy equipment operators. These are people we rely on, employees, to pick up the trash. We used to historically require a valid commercial driver's license at the time of application to even consider you for the job. We now will test and consider applicants with a permit, providing that they can obtain the actual license by completion of a working test period. We're doing everything we can to try and broaden our thinking on how we can recruit and retain candidates, and we're struggling. For a couple of years now, it seems like we've been carrying close to 100 examinations on a weekly basis. My staff go to career fairs, and 75 to 85% of the people that walk up to our table ask, point blank, the first words out of their mouth are, do I have to live in the city to work for the city? And when my staff, when Mr. Frank and Ms. Thomas's staff say yes, they automatically say, well, I don't want to do that. And I believe that a lot of them, a lot of candidates would be interested in working for our great city and making it a better community for all of us to live in. They're not capable. They have mortgages. They're underwater. They're not in a position where, because of needing to send their children through school. They're able to do that for the personal reasons here in the city.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay, as long as Alderman Vaccaro is out of the room, I guess I'll be vice chairing this hearing. Before we go to public speakers, I feel like members of the committee might have some questions for members of our personnel staff. I have a few questions. So if Mr. Frank could maybe come back up first, and we'll run through the committee in order of seniority. Do we have a list? Oh, Joe's back. Oh, okay. Alderman Kennedy, do you have any questions for Mr. Frank?
No, not at this point, thank you.
Alderman Boyd?
Not at this time.
Somebody better ask a question, because I brought him. Alderman Arnowitz? Oh, okay,
I have no questions.
okay. Alderman Arnowitz?
Anybody have any WD-40? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As everyone knows, my name's Larry Arnowitz. I worked for the city for 35 years. I left in December 2010 because I was unhappy about a lot of things. But during my employment with the city, I worked 10 years in personnel as the investigator for residency. And I can tell you this, and I think Mr. Franks and Linda can testify, probably over 200 jobs were lost while I was the investigator. And there was, I know, 12 that appealed, and none were successful. So it brings us to the point, you know, there's a lot of places, if you work for within the city, you're required to reside in the city. You know, as we move on, we are struggling. I mean, we're paying taxes. When I say we're paying taxes, everyone is, and we're not getting the quality of service I think we should get, and that's because we are short tree trimmers, parks employees, street department employees, and everything else. So I've learned that. You know, I think residency was lifted at one time in 2006 for the police department, was it, or somewhere? But there was no mass exodus, and I think, and I'm just being honest, the biggest majority of city employees that work for the city probably can't afford to move. They've been settled in, and they're not going to give their home up. If I wasn't an alderman, I'd still be living where I'm at. I enjoy living in the city because it's close to everything. But the ultimate thing is, you know, it's up to the voters. All we can do is put it out there on the ballot. It takes 2/3 to pass. But we can also, you know, what incentives can we give city employees? We've been getting, or when I was a city employee, for over 12 years, a 1.5% raise every year. Well, 1.5% raise barely buys you a gallon of milk, if that, after your insurance goes up. Insurance is going up again this year for city employees. So I think we have to come to some type of, you know, a medium, a compromise. The biggest reasons I hear people don't want to live in the city is because of our school system. So, you know, the firefighters went to court and won their case because of the school system not being accredited. Now, is that fair for other city employees? Personally, I think not. I don't think there would be a mass exodus, especially if we can figure out an incentive to keep city employees here. That's the main thing. You want employees to work. You want them to come to work every day. You want qualified people. Even the police, after 7 years, they had the option to move out. But I'll tell you this, In my ward, I have over 144 policemen that live in my ward, and they got way more than 7 years on. But the younger ones who have reached the 7 years, not all, have moved because of the school system. And believe me, they don't like paying the tuition in private schools either. So one time when police lived in the city, they were able to take police cars home. We've seen them in neighborhoods everywhere. We don't have that luxury anymore. You know, we just need to come to a compromise. And I think the ultimate thing is city residents should have their say-so. And they're they are the people that will decide if this bill goes forward. And you being the taxpayers deserve to be able to vote on that. So I think this is what I know after 35 years. And I'm just throwing it out there. You know what? I think we miss a great talented of people from anywhere else sometimes if you can't get the qualified people. We have 3 classes going right now, speaking with the new public safety director today and the new commissioner. We have 3 classes going right now in the police academy. We have 22 to 25 in each class. So you figure a few of them's not going to make it all the way through in each class. That's not good. I can remember one class in the police academy was 40 people. So I think it brings the option of more talent, people more serious about wanting to work for the city. Or what is there that we can offer people that works for the city to stay in the city, because they get frustrated as workers. I know, I'm out there, I talk to them every day. I stop and thank them for their work. I know I can call their boss and get something done, but the workers are the one doing the work. That's the person I want to keep happy. And I want them to enjoy working for the city. But if there's something we can do for city workers, I really would like to see that. If we can get some kind of incentive to draw people here and stay with the city, and I think that's the whole goal behind it. Now, I'll be quiet because I've talked too much, but thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. I'd like to address just a couple of your points because I think you've had some good insights. I've been looking at the number of police employees and fire department employees who've moved outside of the city for several years now, and we're actually down. We've seen a reversal. Now, part of that with the police could be because we're down about 130 positions, but notwithstanding that fact, there were, last time we looked, which was about a year and a half ago, 775 officers, total employees, I should say, of the police division were residing outside of the city of St. Louis. As of today's date, it's now down to 700. And a couple years ago, the fire department, that it had 275 people who were living outside of the city of St. Louis. Today I had IT run the report. It's now down to 261. So I think, your insights there are correct. I don't know that we would necessarily have that kind of exodus. And the other type of thing that we can do, and we've started doing, are these different types of incentives. For instance, you may be aware that now the Department of Personnel, working with the police division, if you're an employee, a full-time permanent employee, and you refer someone to the police officer trainee job and they graduate from the academy, they will get a $500 cash bonus, which is a wonderful thing. We can do a similar type of thing if we have the money, and through the compensation ordinance already. It allows us to work together to establish a system of incentives. So you could do something like University City and say, if you reside within the city of St. Louis, after you've gotten permanent status, you get a $1,000 bonus. Other cities have even used larger amounts, $2,000, $3,000, whatever is feasible. I've talked to that a little bit with Judge Jimmy Edwards already and the Deputy Director of Public Safety. So that is entirely possible. On one final note, and this is just spanning my career of like 35 years, what's ironic about the city of St. Louis is that normally if there are residency requirements, it's usually for fire or for police. It's for the public safety so that they live within a certain response time. Currently, the police and fire have to live within a 60-minute response time. It's the other non-public safety functions who don't have the requirements. So we're sort of backwards compared to what most most entities used to have. Although, again, if you look at the information, you'll see that most of them now don't have any residency requirements at all. So I thank you for your insights for that.
Thank you. And I, just one last thing. I do remember the commissioner over in the justice system had come to public safety within a year and even said he would like the idea of having residency lifted for hiring of correctional officers because he's having a hard time over there.
And interesting, this is very, very interesting. We went to the Civil Service Commission and got that approved if necessary. We didn't have to use it. We, within a few months, I think, Brian, did we have over 300 applicants? I mean, we got a deluge of applicants. It was just the thought in the public's mind that they didn't have to necessarily move within that time frame, and we got this immense influx. So we got a very nice response back from Commissioner Glass saying that that's the highest staffing level they've had in years. So even just the thought of lifting that residency requirement was something that was really very positive for us.
Okay. Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Murphy,
No, nothing at this time, thank you.
Vice Chairman Ogilvy.
Thank you. So it sounds like about 50% of the fire department, that's the one sort of test case we have right now, or the most thorough test
A
case.
third, 31%, I think.
Yeah, so about 50% of fire department employees, excuse me, I meant police department, I said fire department.
Oh, yeah, pardon me. Yeah, nearly 50% of the police
50%
department.
of police department employees live outside the city limits. That's, okay.
Correct.
So that's probably a reasonable expectation then for the rest of the city employees, correct? So we're talking maybe 2,500-ish city employees, over, not immediately, of course, but over time, we could probably expect to see leave.
I'm not sure. That's why I mentioned that we've been looking at this since local control, and we're not seeing that exodus. We've actually seen a small decrease in the percentages of people in fire division and police division who are living outside the city. So that's kind of
Right, but
an
it's
anomaly.
still roughly 50%. So the police department had the longest period where they did not have a residency requirement after 7 years, and that experience was about 50% ended up not living in the city.
Correct.
So what I'm saying is maybe that's a reasonable assumption for the rest of city employees. Over time, you know, we'll go from 100% where we're at right now. That residency will decline to probably 50%. And I'm just saying that's about 2,500 employees across other city departments that we can expect won't end up living here in the future. So I think that's our. I think that's our best guess, since we don't know. I might have to
I understand.
pause for a moment. I understand you support this idea, but what are some other things we can do? So our residency requirement is 90 days, correct?
The residency requirement is 120 days.
120 days.
Yeah, after you complete your working test period so that you have permanent status. The last thing we would, hope to do, and I think the authors of the charter, was to have a full-time person come in and, sell their house and then get fired, because they have no recourse to the Civil Service Commission.
Right. So is that period 6 months for most people?
For most people, it's 6 months. It can be up to 11 months, but typically it's 6 months.
So really, there's 10 months where the first 10 months of your employment, you're not technically required to
Correct.
live in the city, and then after 10 months, you are. So I guess one thing we could think about doing is extending that, or we could, the other thing we could do is sunset it, right? We could use the experience of the police department and say, you have to live here at first because, maybe we value the fact that you're a member of the community at some point during your tenure as a city employee, but you reach some point and you're allowed to live wherever you want or within some radius. I think the complete removal of this requirement is a big change that we can't go back from. And if we take this step, this is how it's going to be for forever. We're never going to reestablish a residency requirement. So I wish we'd look at something a little more interim that isn't such a big change, personally. Thanks.
Any comments or?
I think it's difficult to ascertain exactly who's living in the city and who's not. There was an FBI investigation that was triggered by some criminal activity, and the FBI reported to me that they had at least 70-some firefighters who were living outside of the city and had another address inside the city. What we see is that with the court rulings, if you have any kind of residency within the city, a small apartment, anywhere that you pay taxes, et cetera, you can make a viable defense for yourself. So I think that happens. I think it happens a lot more regularly than we think, where there's people that have dual residencies. But I think that, this legislation could go any way you want. If anything, I think the important thing for the public safety is that you have some kind of response time required, for people that are mission critical, who are firemen, who are police officers. They need to be able to reach the scene of an event quickly, whereas if you've got someone else who is, like I said, in a different type of function, it may not be that important. So I hear what you're saying, though, certainly, Alderman.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Alderwoman Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Frank, for being here. So we've talked a little bit about the reasons why people outside of the city are not applying for jobs in the city, but what are the primary reasons we are not recruiting people within the city for these jobs?
I think it depends on the job class. I mean, we have a distinct set of people from whom we can recruit if we're going to require them. I look at the police department, and there's an enormous amount of people that we reject because they fail the character investigation, the criminal background investigation, which would indicate that they would not be appropriate. So we're fishing from the same pool. That's what happens is, initially you are successful, but then as time goes by and the population stays the same, and you're just really not able to, recruit as successfully. Now, we do give a number of different things for city employees. They get 5 promotional points for for being a permanent city employee when they apply, so they have that advantage. And they also have a residency bonus point for living within the city. And I think there's all sorts of different things that we can do to incentivize people to live in the city, as I was explaining to Alderman Arnowitz. But I think it's just a shrinking talent pool. We've lost about 50,000 in population, over the last 15 years. Hopefully that's reversing itself, but it makes it difficult.
Is part of it also that we have people who would be eligible, but they just don't have the training for some of these positions?
Well, for some of the positions, we're working more closely now with Slate in terms of community outreach to see if people who are displaced can work in another capacity. Sometimes we have people who are injured through workers' compensation or even non-work-related types of activities. And what we want to do is, if we have like a heavy equipment operator who's a CDL driver and they get injured and they can no longer perform their job, maybe they've never had training on a desk job or an office job. So we're working in conjunction with Dr. Alice Prince now to see if we can have these kinds of efforts where we can keep people in our workforce and retrain them. We're consistently doing that for some of our hard-to-fill positions. We now hire attorney trainees because we're finding that we can attract people right out of law school and let them work under Rule 13, the Supreme Court operating rules, and then they can become attorney once after they get licensure. We have established incentive programs, for instance, for people who don't have CDLs. Maybe they're in refuse or towing, and we will give some of our senior staff a 10% salary increase to help them assist in training these new employees. So, we are trying to strategize with the operating departments about what we can do, to strengthen our own talent pool, but particularly struck with the police because, again, you can just tell that it's a sort of a stagnant pool. When we went out to do a recruitment, we asked last time for the big police officer trainee, we asked for the assistance of 30 different municipalities and some of the surrounding counties, and not one, this post-Ferguson, not one of them said that they could do it or would do it. I think everybody is stretching now in terms of law enforcement, and so I think that's a real challenge for us, probably more than the other positions.
Thank you. I have no more questions. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry. Step away a second. So Alderwoman Middlebrook? No questions. Okay, so we do have Alderman Jeffrey Boyd does have a follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Franks. A question, if the voters approve this, if we make this to our charter, could we still require senior management, like our police chief, our fire chief, to be a city resident, or they're welcome to live outside as well and just meet?
Certainly, however, the Board of Aldermen elects to submit it to the voters. And I think you'll see with some of the data that I provided that there are a number of different organizations, different cities, et cetera, that require their executive level team to be residents.
So we would have to have it in this legislation to go before the voters. Like right now, it just allows for any and everybody to move.
I'd defer to Lou about that, but I think it probably would need to go into the charter language.
That echo, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you.
I think, I would ask the Board of Aldermen's attorney to opine on that. I don't feel comfortable.
No, I understand.
But I think it would probably need to go to the vote of the people.
Okay. And someone told me that in extenuating circumstances, you as the personnel director can grant waivers for residency in some cases. Is that true?
I cannot. The only entity that has the authority to grant a waiver is the Civil Service Commission. And the Civil Service Commission, upon the request of the appointing authority and with feedback from me, can grant those. They can only be granted for a class of a position for up to 1 year. They have to be renewed on an annual basis. The problem is, the way that the charter section reads, is that if there are then qualified people who emerge within the city system who are qualified, those other people have to be laid off. And Linda, my deputy director of many years, could kind of opine on this, but my understanding is that we at one time had a very, very strong IT department, and many of them lived outside of the city. We then had people come forth from the city who wished to be employed, and a number of those people had to be laid off.
Yeah, about 10 of them.
I didn't hear a response. I'm sorry. Could she come before and so people would know who's talking? Thank you. Good to see you, Linda.
There was about 10 of them.
Please introduce.
They lived in, I'm sorry.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Linda Thomas, Deputy Director of Personnel. There was about 10 from the data processing section, the IT section. They were all over the place in Illinois and all over the place, and we opened up some exams, and we had city residents apply, and they all lost their waivers and therefore got laid off and lost their jobs. They are the people who put together the mainframe that we currently are still using.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They put together the payroll system.
Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone on the board here have any questions? Alderwoman Howard, you said you did have something? No. Oh, I'm sorry. Alderwoman Davis? Any questions, or do you want to speak? Or? There's a seat up here. You could join us. I think, do we have a spare? One thing I could say about the legislative committee, they're good at showing up. We always have a great turnout.
Right.
Alderwoman Davis.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to just ask a couple of questions, because one of the problems I've had with talking to people around the city is they don't always get a response when they apply. And people are needing jobs, and so they just keep going until they find a job, and they don't continue to seek us out once they don't get a response. The other part to that, too, is if we do this, one of the things that we have to consider is now we're putting those people who need jobs more than anybody else at jeopardy and not being selected, because now you have this enormous amount of people who are coming from everywhere, and we get plenty of applications. It is not hard to recruit, so I dispute that no matter what, and I want to see some records. So now we're jeopardizing those people who live here in this city from getting jobs. And I would like to see more teeth to the bill. I'd like to see priority for those people who live in the city, where they get points if you live in the city, if you apply for a job. because they should have an advantage if they already live here. So there are a number of things that we need to put in place for those people who have committed themselves to living here in the city of St. Louis. I know that when we have applications at the Board of Aldermen, we get people applying from all over this country, and we have no problems with that. We just had a position, we have 42 people apply for, and we didn't think we'd get hardly maybe 10. We have 42 people apply. The two positions before that, one had 80-something, another one had 90-something. And so if for some reason you can't find a qualified people out of that number of people, there's something wrong with the process. So I don't see it as being a problem. With the NGA, we had a job fair. We didn't spend one dime on advertising. We went where people were and left the information, used social media. We had 547 people come. We just have to do better and different. And there are too many people that live in this city that can't qualify for these jobs. There are too many opportunities for us to get them out of. The high schools, the junior colleges, the business schools, whatever level that we need, the colleges, all of that. And so it is not a problem. It's just that we are not doing it right. And I really would want to see us maintain the population that we have in the city, not open our doors and our opportunities for us to lose residents, because all we're doing now is shooting ourselves in the foot. So now that means you're going to have less people who are paying taxes, less taxes, mean we have less money to provide services. That's not fair. That's not fair to those who stay. So we have to really think this through a little bit, and I think that we could do better in a lot of ways, and I know that some people have some concerns. School district is not a concern. The school district is accredited, and it has so many levels of choice now, from every type of career path, full kindergarten now. That saves people a ton of money. And the kindergarten system is the best in the state of Missouri with the St. Louis Public Schools. And people are walking over themselves to try to get in there. So there's just too many reasons why we need to look at everything different. We need to promote the city different. And I think that we could do fine. I just don't see it as a problem for recruiting. I just don't see it. I know that with the police department, we've had some issues. People have been turned away who want to be police officers, and they didn't have problems. It's just that how they do, and I think that's about to change. You can't tell me that 200 people in the last 4 months had a problem. No, they didn't. So we just have to look at things different, and we have to improve that. We also have the opportunity, we can go back to making sure that we offer incentives to help people buy homes like we did before. I mean, there's just too many ways to get people to agree and or accept employment here. And many of the lower level wage jobs you're talking about, people are knocking on the door every day wanting to be hired. Every day. And it's not about them having a record or anything. So I don't understand what the problem is. I talk to them every day. I know they're out here. So I just don't want to jump into something because that sounds, you think it's going to make it easier, and it's not. It really isn't.
I don't think it's a matter, Alderwoman, of making it easier. It's just broadening our pool. We've already taken steps in terms of any person who is a permanent city employee, and that means that they pass their probationary period, they get promotional points. That's 5 points. That is a huge, huge amount on a 100-point scale. And they also, the Board of Aldermen passed an ordinance that gives residency points. Mm-hmm. So we're already giving and recognizing the value of having people live within the city. In terms of, the difficulties we experience in recruiting, it's in certain identified job classifications. We have over 600 job classifications. It's 30 to 40, as I said, that we consistently have difficulties recruiting. I mentioned the police because it's ironic. I'm meeting hopefully next week with Judge Jimmy Edwards and the new police chief, Commissioner Hayden, to talk about how police intelligence performs its background checks and comes up with its recommendations. Because as you know, we banned the box many years ago, and we're now allowing offenders that may have committed something when they're young or unrelated actually apply for employment and be successful contributors to the
If
city.
they can be U.S. senators, they can be police officers.
Exactly.
Okay? So I agree with that part.
And I've had that
Yeah.
discussion with, Judge Edwards already, so we're going to be reviewing that process to see that we're not eliminating so many of our, applicants, so. I appreciate what you're saying. I also think that we can certainly, personnel's role is to attempt to be, responsive and come up with, creative ways, and we can do that. If we have the money, there's other kinds of incentives that we can do to have these people stay in the city and want to come into the city. We have relocation expenses, and the departments that have money to do that, we can pay for them to relocate. So there's a lot of mechanisms there.
We just have too many opportunities to be successful. Most of our high schools have dual programs, so our kids are bridging. They're taking their junior college courses and graduate. A lot of them are graduating with 30 credit hours. They're more than qualified for most of the jobs that you're talking about, but nobody is going there to try to hire them.
Well, actually, both Fire and Local 73 go out to the inner city schools and start recruiting for fire department positions because they only have to be 18 years of age.
And they don't get accepted.
Pardon me?
They don't get accepted.
We do a lot of hiring. Last time we had 1,600 applicants for firefighters.
I don't know, I've never believed that your first responders should be an hour or 2 hours away from you. And we have some that literally drive 2 hours. That, to me, is not a first responder. Because if we have an emergency in this town, and we tend to have them on all levels quite often now, how are you gonna be here to take care of it?
I understand your concern, and that's why the former administration fought the fire department legislation that allowed them to move an hour outside the city. And in terms of and we lost at the Supreme Court. We won at Circuit Court, we won at the Court of Appeals, and we lost at the Supreme Court. With regard to the police and the local control statute, RS Missouri 84344, anyone who's hired by the police department after 9/113 has to reside within the city of St. Louis. So we are moving more towards, having a homogenized type of requirement for residency. But it's just the bigger issue that the board needs to consider about the pluses versus the minuses.
So the last two times that the residents voted, it didn't include all city employees. It was only talking about first responders.
I understand that really the fire department, the union crafted its own legislation that exempted all fire department employees. That was done at the state level and not through anything at the city. It was done through a state statute. And the state can write those kinds of requirements as long as it doesn't interfere with the Missouri Constitution prohibition that does not allow the state legislature to do anything to interfere with the powers, duties, or compensation of the city employees.
Yeah,
So-
we've gone over that hurdle, thank the Lord.
Yeah.
So, but, and so I was reading some of the comments online and some of the things people have walked up to me and said, I thought we solved that problem. Didn't we vote on that already? And I'm like, this is new. This is adding all city employees. So we're what, right at 6,000 now?
About 6,730.
Oh, it's higher than I thought.
About
Okay.
6,700 full-time
Yeah.
authorized vacancies. That doesn't mean filled positions, but ones that are actually in the table of organization. And then in addition, we might have 500 to 700 per performance employees during the summer.
Oh, okay. So even if we only had a third of those people who would choose, if this was to pass by the voters, to leave the city, that's an awful lot.
Indeed.
Especially when we've been averaging in the last two census, 26,000 to 29,000 people leaving the city of St. Louis. And so we'll shoot ourselves in the foot and just add another few thousand to that. Why not?
I defer to your wisdom on that. I'm just looking at this from a more limited HR perspective, but I understand that there's a lot of things to consider with this legislation. And
I believe in
ultimately-
compensating people for those things that we need. I believe in that. So I believe in giving opportunities to them. I believe in giving bonuses. Everybody's doing it now, the hospitals, everybody's doing bonuses now for those who serve, for those who meet the special requirements that are needed, and so those are things we may have to look at. But opening this can of worms, it might hurt us in the future. And this city is already suffering. It's suffering now, and I'm afraid for what we're going to see with the next census. As many as we move in, that a number moves out. So we got to really be careful about that. And I don't think people dislike living in the city. I think one of the things is we've had a lot of challenges in providing the services that we need to provide in the city, and we haven't always been unified to provide those services. I see a new day on the horizon. I see people that are more willing to work together. I see communities coming together. I see this Board of Aldermen working better together. And so I think that we have a good future ahead of us, and this city is going to thrive. I really do.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, that's all for me, sir.
Thank you. So, just what goes through my head just quickly, the residency for the police were done when they were not under city control.
Correct.
And now that the police are under city control, all new hires have to live in the city and they don't get the 7 and out. Is that right?
Yes, after 9/113. So only people hired prior to local control by the Board of Police Commissioners have that 7-year rule. And anybody hired after 9/113 are under the same residency rule as we are. And now the clock is ticking also for the firemen because, again, our schools are fully accredited. So after a 5-year period of time, all new fire department employees will also have to live within the city.
Thank you. Is there any other questions for Director Frank? Yes.
One thing,
We'll
Joe.
try to keep it short.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I heard the Alderwoman from the 19th, and it makes a lot of valid points. I agree. So the city's moving together and working together. What have we done for city employees in the last 15 years in this city? I mean, I remember a time when you got a 3% raise every year and a 5% raise on your anniversary. 1.5% every year doesn't solidify being a happy worker for the city. And some jobs out there, a lot of people wouldn't do. You got water department employees out there working 12 hours a day now for all the breaks in the city, this, that, everything else. But we pass other things and give raises and everything else, but city employees are never included, and that's just unfair to me. I think we'd make a lot of happy campers if they at least one time to say we're moving together, let's give city employees, well, let's find and give them a 5% raise this year in the budget. I mean, there's monies, to me, there's no doubt, there's monies to be found. You need to tighten purse strings in other places. My personal pet peeve in this city is, why do we have a director and a commissioner in each department? The director reports strictly to the mayor. Commissioners are hired by the city of St. Louis to run that department. So, to me personally, we don't need a director. I mean, there's a start right there and savings right there. And I mean, I can go other places, you know, but I don't want to put a bill out there before the voters that isn't thoroughly thought through. And I'm glad this is just a step, and it may not come out of committee and it may not pass the board. But I think we have to put a good bill together one way or the other. You just don't want to throw something halfway out there and then come back and bite you. Let's be honest, how long has our schools been accredited for? A year now?
They were provisionally accredited for 3 years prior, and they just got their full accreditation.
Okay.
And they also partnered with the charter school systems, and so we have choice with charter schools, with partnerships. We also have choice with some of the private schools and partnerships.
So,
One of the reasons,
Schools, I don't think really have a bearing on this because
Well, and I'm not going to get into it either. But there's just a lot of reasons, but like I say, if the time comes when we feel that it should be voted on, it's ultimately up to the voters. They're the taxpayers, and if they feel like you should have to live in the city, then that's the way they should vote, and I truly believe that. I can live with it one way or the other. My next move would be at Jefferson Barracks when I'm 6 foot under. But, I don't think it was fair to city employees that firefighters were able to go to court and win their case based on the school system. What about a city employee who has the same problem? I mean, and I think these separate entities that file these lawsuits over the residency is not fair to all the employees in the city of St. Louis. So, we have to come up with something and make something work. We need to get this city back together. We hear, people are paying a lot of taxes in this city, and they're getting tired of hearing about we got to raise this because of that, this, and everything else. And that's what we got to get away from. It might be a little more expensive to live in the county, but, I think that the taxes that everybody pays in the city of St. Louis adds up too, so we have to give them a better service than what we're giving them somewhere. So,
Thanks.
and I'll be quiet.
Yeah, because I want to,
Joe, I don't have to be nowhere to Friday morning at 10 o'clock.
I know, but we have a lot of people here, and I appreciate everybody's time and listening to us. Anyone else on the committee? Thank you. I appreciate you coming up. We're going to go through, we're going to do one pro, one con, back and forth. There's way more cons than pros. And we'll start on the pro side. Randall Haynes. Randall, are you here? You might have got tired and went home. Okay. How about Mark Oglesby? You related to Scott? It's got the same name.
Good evening. I'm not really a speaker, but.
Oh, you're fine. You do good.
I'm a sergeant with the Airport Police Department. I've been employed by the city of St. Louis for 26 years. Okay.
Just a little bit.
Like I said, I've been employed by the city for 26 years in a law enforcement capacity. I understand both sides of this deal, but I have to look at it from the perspective of the city employees that I deal with and those that I don't get to deal with. One of the biggest things we've had in our department, I also work with Metro PD officers on secondary. It's the same thing. We talk about we want to keep the city safe. We want to make the city safer. I have had numerous police officers already experienced, like, y'all hiring? I'm like, yeah, man. Oh, you got to live in the city, right? Yeah. I've had people that I've gone to that were thinking about going in law enforcement. I said, why don't you either apply with us or apply with Metro? No, I'm going to go out here. They've worked at other munis that don't pay half of what we pay. They don't have any benefits. They have to buy half their equipment themselves because they don't want to live in the city. I know people who have been looking for jobs in other areas besides law enforcement that I said, hey, man, go to the city website. They hiring. I got to live in the city? Yeah. No. What I have seen in the 26 years that I started in my department, we had a number of 125 officers. We are down to 63. I know 8 that are in the process of going to other places. It's not about the money. It's not about the benefits. They don't want to raise their children or bring their families. I've had people gotten divorced because moms are like, my kids are not going to city schools. And those are bigger issues, but as a city worker that is now responsible for supervising other people, now I may not be down here in the 4th district or 7th district, but that airport generates money for the city, so somebody got to keep it safe. If I can't get quality people, and 90% of the reasons why I can't get quality people is because they want to live where they want to live, let them live. That's all I'm saying. You know, I understand the tradition, and I signed up for it when I came on and all that. But now that sometimes when you're outside of the system, you're looking at it, you don't really know it. But once you get to working around, you start realizing, hey, wait a minute. When it was just me, I didn't have to worry about it, but now I have a bigger responsibility, not just to my family, but to the family of the men and women that I supervise. And if I can't tell a guy, hey, don't worry about it, we got other people. Sometimes there are only 4 officers, including me, to do that whole airport. Now, some of you all don't know everything we do, and I understand that, but that's the same way Sergeant Hickman that I work with on secondary. He has to have 4 officers to work the entire 4th district. Why? Because they leave it. I understand tradition. I understand wanting to build the city strong, but like Mr. Frank said, if you only give me a pool this big, pretty soon I'm going to pluck out everything. It's just about, if you can take one thing off the board that will allow you to expand your things, to me, it just makes sense.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
We'll go through that. Does anyone on the board, anyone have a question? Okay, yes.
So you work at the airport, but you live in the city?
Yes, ma'am. We are
So
city
you make
employees.
that commute every day?
Yes.
Okay. It's all I needed to know. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you live closer.
And
Yeah.
this has been discussed about that, well, if they give it to you, get your commuter allowance, you wouldn't get it. Okay. It's not that much. So, I mean, it's just, and like I said, I'm not just talking about the police department, that's my area of expertise. I've talked to people in other city departments, and everyone is having the same problem. And 90% of the time, they say, man, I just can't get nobody, because don't nobody want to live in the city. It's a perception of the city that maybe ain't right, but perception is reality.
Well, and maybe it's time we look at it the other way. Instead of making people live in the city, maybe we need to provide incentives for people to live in the city.
Something. If you gotta stay, give them something. But if you want to leave, don't shackle nobody from doing what they feel is best for their families. That's all I'm saying.
I got you.
Thank you, Mark, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Veronica Page. This will be on the con side, and we only really have one more on the pro side, so, Veronica, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Could you live in the city?
I do. I'm a Tower Grove East resident.
Okay, cool.
So is that Alderwood 8?
Oh, you're fine.
Oh, yeah. So I came in here and against the bill, and I want to kind of decouple why I'm against it. I don't have much of an opinion on city employees having a, forever requirement for the city. That's, I don't know, my dad worked for 30-something years as a city employee in Tulsa, Oklahoma, my hometown. And there was no requirement like that there, so that's kind of foreign to me. But it doesn't make sense to decouple it for the officers, at least in first responders, to me, because I would think that we would want those officers to be invested in the community and, live around, know the area, and if they aren't living in the city, they might not have as much incentive. For a year and a half, I was living in the city and commuting to Chesterfield, and I had way more investment in the city of St. Louis than I did to Chesterfield. Noticeably, it was just somewhere that I lived. So that, there's other ways to do incentives to have more people. I like the idea of having preference for employees, city employees. If it's, a financial hardship to get them to move to the city, then the city as an employer could move the families there and pay for that relocation fee, because that's done often in the private sector. So anyways, that was just my thought, is that it makes sense to have first responders who make life and death decisions that sometimes comes up in the news be invested in the city and, be around to make the city better.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for Veronica?
Just a quick question, and I get what you're saying about first responders, but do you agree that maybe we can make or help our city employees that's here with some kind of incentives would make it better?
For all employees or the first responders?
For all city employees.
Can you repeat the question?
So all city employees, if we could give them an incentive that they will stay, that, and I think people would stay if we could come up with some kind of bonus, this, that.
Yeah.
You think that's a good morale booster, say, hey, I'm gonna stay here, I get a chance to get this
Right.
every year,
Yeah,
so.
I think so.
Okay, all right, and thank you, I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I mean, it's a bonus at the end if you end up being,
Yes.
I think it'd be better to have a bonus at the beginning to move people here
Yeah,
too and get them established here.
That's awesome.
So,
Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. I'm going to stay on the con side just because we only have one more on the pro. Phil Weeks.
Hello. Thank you very much.
Phil, do you live in the city?
Yes, I live in the city.
I knew the
yeah.
answer, but
I live in Tower Grove South. So with regard to...
you don't have to be that close to
Yeah.
everything. It's out of control.
Move this
There
move
you
this
go,
back.
you're good.
So first of all, with regard to the employment problems that the police are having, I'd like to point out two facts that I think are really important. One, our city population has been declining. So, you know, you're losing a pool of people, right, that could be occupying positions within the city. Okay, so that's one reason why you're having difficulty finding people in the city.
Keep everything directed.
Yeah, I'm
in this
sorry, it's
direction.
hard to speak.
No, I mean, keep all your
Oh, well, I
testimony
mean, I
going
was
this direction.
addressing, sure.
He'll be able to hear
Okay.
you.
The second thing is, all police departments right now are having difficulty finding pools of people. So it's not really, and third, I'll get back to three, but it's very true that I think that it's important that we have people who are performing service positions to be invested in the community. That's why I like our older people to live in the wards that they come from, okay? Because you're familiar with the city. You get to know it. You know that Bob down the street has a son who's addicted to opioids, right? And you know the services that they can get. If we want our police to be problem solvers, we want them to know what's in the community. If they're in the community, they can help find the solutions, okay? And I think if we want community policing, okay, we should really be looking at having people living here. Now, I can think of one very famous St. Louis Metropolitan Police Association employee that views the city as an other, okay? And that's Jeff Rorda, okay? What happens when you hire someone like a Jeff Rorda who constantly condemns the city, constantly casts...
This is, keep it to this. Jeff Rorda is not a city employee. He can live anywhere
Oh,
he
yes,
wants.
but he influences the police department, which I think is really important.
But that's by their, it doesn't really, he can live where he wants.
Right,
Let's
but
keep
doesn't
it
he
to
have an
the-
influence on the people in the police department? You don't think he
Oh,
has?
I mean, he's hired by the police department, it
No,
doesn't work for the city.
No, I understand what you're talking about, but I'm just saying that when you have people, police employees, right, who listen to people who are associated with the police, okay, and view the people in the city as other, okay, that affects their perspective of the city, and I don't think that's a very good idea.
We don't hire
Okay, but
for them at
I'll get
all.
off that topic
No, we do
now.
not hire for the, we're talking about all the employees in the city. We don't hire for the police department. We don't, you know, they hire their own attorneys.
Right, and so...
They're not affiliated with the city police department, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so to move beyond that point, now, when we hire a doctor, a medical doctor, we choose our doctor, right? We go out and we say, you know, the best person for my foot problem might live in the county, right? And you get to choose who you see. When you get pulled over by a police officer, right, you don't choose the police officer. You hope that they understand your community. You hope that they understand the situations that you live in, okay? So I want to see a police officer workforce, a police department that reflects our community, because we don't choose who we get pulled over by. We want someone who understands our city, understands the problems in the city, and now, when I hear people referring to the Ferguson effect, okay, and I get very discouraged. The Ferguson effect has been applied to many things, but I think if you really want to apply the Ferguson effect to this situation, you realize that there were only 11% of minorities or African Americans and people of color on the Ferguson Police Department. And they believe part of the problem was that they didn't have people in Ferguson requiring that they live in there. Okay, so the Ferguson effect is really when you don't hire people in the community, when you don't hire people who are representative of your community, that's the Ferguson effect. That's what you get. Okay, so I think the final point that I would like to make is that I really do think that you're making a mistake if we don't also reflect on ourselves in this situation. We give tax abatements. When we give tax abatements, no, it does. It has a direct effect on the city.
But we're
Okay,
needing.
it has effect on city schools.
We're needing to speak with whether or not you believe we should let city employees move out of the city.
Right.
or
So
not.
here's
That's
my
what we're
point.
trying to stick with.
Okay, listen. Here's my point. It's very simple. It's economics.
Okay, keep it simple.
Okay, it's economics. We pay a tremendous amount in taxes in the city. Okay, that's right. We just had a raise to increase the police force, increase the pay in the police force. Okay, so do we want the money leaving or staying in the city?
Sure.
Okay, so that's one argument. But the thing is that why do we want money in the city? It's for schools. Okay, it's partially for schools. And if we do keep on giving tax abatements, we are robbing money from the schools.
You're back
No,
on tax
listen.
abatement. I'm probably going to end up cutting you off unless you stick
Okay.
germane to whether or not, because we're not talking about
Did we
tax
mention
abatement.
schools as being a
We're not
problem in
talking
St.
about
Louis City?
this. I would
Did
just
we?
say, please keep it to whether or not it pertains to this board bill. Again,
Okay.
TIFs, tax abatement do not pertain to this.
Okay, so, all right. The last point with regard to the police department, when you don't give raises, okay, to the senior police department, you lose police officers. If you weren't losing as many senior police officers, you wouldn't need to hire as many new ones, okay? So those things are factors and should be looked at, particularly when we're talking about raises. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Zach Fortune, and that would be on the pro side.
Thank you, Alderman. I appreciate it. I'm just here to reiterate what Alderman Arnowitz has already said, what Director Franks, Mr. Beckelman have already said as well, and it's the quality and the limited pool that we have for our staffing. And my name is Zach Fortune, by the way. I work for the St. Louis Street Department.
And you live in the city then?
And I do live in the city. And I'm a right-of-way foreman there, so I deal with everything underneath the street department. The umbrellas, traffic and lighting, refuse, tow lot, and ESD. And all of these, every single day, everybody's short. We're short tow lot drivers, we're short construction equipment operators, our utility workers, everything from the base level, entry level positions, you can't fill them because you don't have qualified candidates. And just alone here, I have 200 signatures that signed this for the abatement of the residency requirement for city employees. And this was about a year and a half ago when I actually went out and got these signatures. And it was within 2 days, I'd say I collected 200. And then I'm not going to get into details, but we put a halt on it. And these are all from your low-level employees all the way up to your commissioners and your directors that have signed this. And I really believe that it's just, you're constricting the city of St. Louis. You open it up, and a major point here is that 90% of these people that signed this out of 200, their thing is they don't want to leave the city. They're willing to stay in the city. They're vested in the city. You know, I just purchased my first home last July, so I got 29 more years to go. So it's, if this were to pass, I'm not selling my house and I'm not leaving. And that's 90% of these 200 people too.
Do you want to give us a copy of that, or do you?
Yeah, absolutely, I can give you a copy of that.
I mean, do you have another copy other than?
No, I don't. I can make copies and get them to
Well,
you however you want.
Our attorney will make you some copies right now.
Absolutely.
We'll make some copies. So not to cut you short or anything.
No, go ahead.
So you feel that that it would actually help you? Is your department short on?
Yes, our department is short, not only on, like our construction equipment operators, we've been short them guys for years now. Concrete finishers, street and traffic inspector, I'm trying to hire one right now, and we have a limited pool down at personnel department. We went through the 6 applicants just 2 months ago. I was only able to hire one off of that because the other ones had no experience whatsoever into the position. We only had 1 out of the 6 candidates. And then we had to go back to personnel and say, do you have anybody else? So they didn't. They had to open it back up and put it on the board. And that's still, 2 months later, we're still waiting on another list to hire from.
Okay. Anyone have questions for Zach? Zach, thank you so much for coming out.
I appreciate it.
And then hang on, we'll get you your list back. All right, thank you. On the con side, and all the rest are going to be con. Tom Prost. Tom probably got tired of listening to us around. Mary, and it looks like Densmore.
There she is.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mary. I live in the city of St. Louis. I'm in the 5th Ward. And one of the things, what'd you say?
She was asking your last name.
Oh, Densmore. Densmore. And one of the things that I wanted to say tonight was just that I keep hearing how, you know, we need this to pass so that way there's more of a wider pool to hire people from. But when I hear that, all I keep thinking about is the thousands of people in our city that are unemployed. And what would it look like instead of having to pay money for people to relocate to the city? What would it look like to instead invest that money into job training programs? What would that look like to support the youth with figuring out a career that could land them in the city? So it's just really hard for me to think about why we would be doing that. And this is a really big decision, a very big thing for our city to think about. And in regards to police officers, you know, when Proposition P was passed, we kept hearing how it was so imperative that it passed because we needed to hire more police officers and all of this. Well, why don't we just let that run its course then and hire police officers in our city that have relationship and connection with the community? And I just think that like a lot is possible for our city, and a bill like this would just really narrow the scope of our city and not improve it in the least.
Would anybody have questions for Mary? Mary, thank you for taking your time tonight. Christian, it looks like Christine, and I can't, it's kind of,
Bridget.
no?
Dragonette.
Dragonette, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah, I'm Christine. I live in the city in the 8th Ward, and I also work in the city. I'm the director of social ministry at the College Church on SLU's campus. And just first, personally, I'm a little concerned hearing that so many people who would apply for these jobs have such an aversion to living in the city, and I know there's many reasons that have been stated behind that, but it just seems like a lot of those folks have just a negative perception of the city, and would we really want those folks working in our city if they are so opposed to living here and have such a negative impression. I'm also here, though, to read a statement from two organizations that are doing really great justice organizing work and have hundreds of active members and supporters behind them. A lot of those folks would be here tonight if they could, but there's a simultaneous meeting happening down the street, a big justice organizing meeting. So I'm reading it on their behalf from Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment and St. Louis Action Council. It is our hope, and the hope of many of the people of our organizations represent, that elected officials in the city of St. Louis carry out their duties in the most equitable manner. Pushing through a bill that repeals the requirement of city workers to live in the city is not only a display showing lack of faith, but lack of promise in the residents of St. Louis City who are unemployed. One of the most glaringly obvious issues of implementing legislative changes like this is staffing the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. While that is a centerpiece in many arguments against the repeal, it is worth reiterating. Opening employment of police officers outside of city residents is a policy that works to undo all of the conversations around community policing that have occurred over the last 4 years. Despite how often elected officials love quoting reports from the Ferguson Commission, policies like this are contrary to it. It is impossible for individuals who do not live in the communities they police to be invested in them. Our organizations are against the passage of Board Bill 194, signed Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment and the St. Louis Action Council and all the people that support them.
Do you have copies for us?
I don't have printed copies at this moment, but
We'll get some before.
I have one question.
Sure.
So you don't feel this should go before the voters, that they should not have a choice about where their employees live?
No, and personally, I'll speak personally. I assume that these organizations would respond the same way, but I personally don't feel that this needs to go any further because, just because of the reasons that were mentioned.
So if your condition of employment would be to live in a certain place, you wouldn't have a problem with that? Do you think that's a fair way of treating people, that a condition of employment has to do with residency?
I wouldn't, and I think especially when the job has to do so specifically with working with people within the city, specifically for the police department, if we're going to talk about community policing.
About all.
Right, but that also, included in that is the police department, and that's what we want to highlight, is that would be included in this, and that's a huge problem for me and for these organizations and all the people that support these organizations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mary, before you go, hey, Mary.
Christine.
That's okay. I haven't had enough coffee. Before you go, when we get a chance, I do want to get a copy of what you have.
Okay, yeah, it's just on my phone now, but we could email it or print it later.
Okay, please get it to us, so we have it.
Email
Because
it to the Board of
all the,
Okay.
because this way, all the different aldermen are not here.
Okay.
And I'm sorry about the name thing.
That's okay.
Colleen Kelly. These are all Colleen? And then we have 3 after this. So, if anybody's curious. Colleen, you're up.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I know, I've been to a lot of these meetings before and heard a lot of these.
Colleen, do you live in the city?
I'm sorry, pardon?
Do you live in the city?
Yes, for 20 years.
Thank you.
And now I live in St. Louis Place I've been there for 10. So I've been to a lot of these meetings, and over and over and over again, I see that we put these bills forward with no sort of research or study done behind it about whether or not what is proven true or what is proven not true. So, for example, we have a city employee who's in charge of personnel testified for a pretty long time. Some of the stuff that he said was that rent was too expensive in St. Louis, which is one of the reasons why people don't want to live here, which I find amusing since we have one of the lowest cost of living in St. Louis ever. And I think a number of people have brought up also around, although rent is increasing in certain areas, but not in others. However, I also really want to say that the amount of creativity that we're talking about around hiring folks, we only see in certain areas, and we do not see across the board in other areas. And I appreciate the folks that brought up the fact that there are thousands of unemployed folks in the city of St. Louis that very easily could be hired or could start to be trained for these jobs. I understand that folks say that they're not qualified, but then we need to start getting creative around how we qualify these folks for these jobs. The other thing too is that I know St. Louis is one of the few cities that still does have these residency requirements. Although over the last couple of years, people have been working really hard in the community around trying to establish more just, sometimes even the last 50 years, people have been working really hard. But we've seen some strides happen, and it would be concerning if we went backwards. I do want to say, though, that what we do see is when these residency requirements get removed, if you look at other cities, you will see that actually what happens is the majority of folks that move out of the city, out of city centers in general, it represents a huge amount of white flight. So it would be, for example, in St. Louis, when he mentioned that only 700 and some odd police officers moved out, the majority of those police officers that live outside of the city are white, and the majority of police officers that work in the city, stay in the city, are black. So I think it's also very important that when we make these broad claims, that we're really sort of understanding what the impacts are. And some of you on this board that have said that they support the Ferguson Commission and the aspects of the Ferguson Commission aren't really asking themselves these questions of what are the implications of this. When you look at other cities that have done this, we see that when removing the residency requirements decreases the amount of diversity on their police force. So again, I would say it's, in theory, we're putting something forward where it's like, yeah, no one should be required of where they live, have to be determined about where they live. But a lot of the times we say these broad statements, not only in these meetings, and we don't really do the research on what actually is effective and what's not effective. So that's what I would just say.
I'm going to keep it real short. I do believe the police chief was in front of us today saying a little bit of the opposite of what you're saying.
I got these numbers from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Are you saying that all the white officers left the city?
I'm not saying all of them did. I'm saying the percentage is higher among white police officers and black police officers.
Because I have 2 kids in the police department that both live in the city.
And I appreciate your anecdotal evidence, but I'm talking about something that I got from the census and from the Equal Employment Opportunity.
And these are nationwide statistics you're speaking of, correct?
No, I have statistics from just St. Louis, and I have statistics from nationwide statistics.
But we
as
haven't
well.
removed our residency requirement, so what you have.
Pardon? We have a 7-year residency, so right now with the police department, after 7 years, you can move outside of the police.
No,
that's not true.
From what I understand, that's
No.
what I've been able to research.
When the city...
And your research is flawed.
Well, when the city was controlled by the state allowed them to leave the city in
After 7 years.
But when we took over the police department, it became a
You
city
eliminated that.
department.
Okay.
We couldn't eliminate it for those that had already left, but every new hire has to live in the city. All the new hires live in the city.
So in the last 3 years?
Since 13.
Yeah.
Since
3 years.
2013.
So I'm using data from 2013 before.
And I will actually ask.
And I would be happy to forward you that data.
I will ask the police chief and to see if they can give me the percentage. I think it was half living outside the city, but he didn't break it into any groups.
I had some conversations with him today, and he seemed to think that if he broadened the pool to take in North County and the suburbs, he could hire more minorities because many of the children that's participating.
And I would say that there are some really what I see as successful creative programs, like when ESOP is doing that 10-week training program. That's a creative solution to a hiring issue. I don't see that in all other aspects. And when we talk about, for everybody else, when we talk about we're seeing that there's not enough qualified people to trim trees or I mean, it just seems like that's something that's a little off.
I was just, the only reason when you said that, and then it was a little contrary to what the chief told us today.
Yeah, definitely, and I would fully admit if I'm wrong, because he, of course, has access to more recent data.
I think we'll
I was
just,
going to share what he shared with me. Many of the children that participated in the DSEG program through St. Louis Public Schools that went out.
Are you talking to Mike?
The chief shared with me that many of the students that participated in the DSEG program that moved to the suburbs for schooling set down roots out there after they graduated. So hiring within the city for African American and white officers is somewhat difficult to meet all of our hiring requirements. And that was his take on it. I don't know what evidence he has, but I figured that,
Neither do I.
He's been there, he's walked the road, and maybe he knows a little more than I do.
Yeah, and I'm not, he's not here, and I would have to.
I'm just sharing
I have no
that.
idea what.
well, the public safety director also said that the diversity in the fire department isn't there, and it would help expand when I listened today. But anyway, I apologize. I'm just, and if you can get forward us that information you have.
I would be more than happy to.
That way, because we're a small group, there's 28 of us all together, and, we're going to pass along. Anyway, Colleen, thank you so much for your time. Annie, and it looks like, thank you, Annie. Annie, do you live in the city?
I do. I
Cool.
live in the Old North neighborhood.
In the what?
Old North.
Oh, okay.
In the 5th Ward.
That's fine.
Yeah, so I think the main thing that's on my mind when I'm hearing about this ordinance tonight is the issue of building trust. So something that I think as a city resident that is vital to the job description of any police officer that's going to serve in my community is that they have an investment in building trust with the neighborhood that they're going to be policing in, that they have a personal relationship with folks in the area. And I know that's not just me, that's a citywide conversation we're having. There's been lots of conversations about community policing in this community. Our mayor and our new police chief have both emphasized the importance of building trust for their approach to policing moving forward. So I would just like to hear from Alderwoman Howard, how do you think someone can build trust without actually living in the community?
I think that if we hire qualified people and we're able to recruit qualified people no matter where they live, that if we have a city and we have people that are qualified and want to move into the city, we could make a incentive for them to relocate into the city, into the community they serve. Having people that be the first requirement is sort of a servitude to me. It puts a requirement on them that we may or may not need. I think that the city, I feel a little bit different. I'm flipping the script. I think that the city has a lot to offer, and I think that people would want to come into the city and move into the city once they're hired. But having that as a prerequisite to being hired sometimes turns people off. Once you move in and you see what we're really about, I think that once you begin working, you can see that there's a lot of amenities in the city that you may not have in the suburbs, and you're more willing to come in, and especially if we offer some incentives for that. But if we're continuing to, as the gentleman said that works at the airport, we're continuing to exhaust the same pool, we're not going to get anything but what we have. And we can't keep fishing in the same pond and expecting to get different fish. So, I mean, I think that the thinking of this is that let's open it up and let's incentivize people moving into the city rather than requiring it, and if we keep doing the same thing the same way, we're going to get the same results. And I just think that opening it up and incentivizing people to move in the city rather than making it a requirement will allow us to recruit the best and the brightest and the people that want to be here, not feel as though they're indentured to be here.
Right. So kind of what you said actually brought up the other point that makes me really uncomfortable with the way this conversation is going, because this conversation around qualified applicants, there's something that sits really bad with me about assuming that we can't find qualified applicants amongst the young people who live in the city of St. Louis.
I don't assume that we cannot.
But this entire conversation has revolved around this assumption that we can't find qualified applicants in St. Louis, so we have to broaden the pool. And I have to agree with Alderwoman Davis that I just don't believe that. I don't think that's true, and I think it's degrading to people. Can I just finish really quick?
Okay.
I think it's actually degrading to people in St. Louis to assume that we can't find qualified applicants here, because we've got a lot of really great people who live in the city.
And I'm testimony to that. I taught school in the St. Louis Public Schools for 32 years, and as I walk outside this building, many of my former students now serve as police officers. They serve as employees to the city of St. Louis. So I by no means think that we cannot recruit from within, but I think that if we broaden the pool, that we have a better chance of recruiting higher quality applicants and having more competition. So that's my reason.
Right. Well, I don't have much more to say. You all are the people who have the power to make decisions that make the city run, and it makes me really uncomfortable to hear you talk about living in the city of St. Louis as indentured servitude. I just think that's a really negative way to talk about a city that you're a leader of.
I'm not saying it is,
You
but I'm
use those
saying that
words
people that
multiple times.
have that perception, why not bring them in and let them work and see what we have to offer here, rather than
This entire conversation has revolved around giving permission to people to leave and still work here, not around, oh, we want them to come in and see how great it is. And I hear what you're saying about incentives. I think incentives are good, but this entire conversation has actually revolved around giving people the green light to leave, not encouraging them to stay, which is what the current law requires.
Thank you.
Annie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless, thank you. Larry Middlebrook, actually, it's her dad, so. It's Alderwoman Middlebrook's dad. So did you talk to her before the meeting?
No, I haven't.
I would think you'd have influence on it.
Mr. Chair and the board, my intentions was not to speak on this, but I just can't sit back after hearing most of the comments and what people are saying. Me, myself, I'm a proud resident of the city of St. Louis. I raised a family here. I love the city of St. Louis. And when I hear that a person want employment here but don't want to live in this city, it hurts my heart. You want to work here, but you don't want to live in the city. You want to take your paycheck and spend it elsewhere, and the city is paying you here. I think if we do and soul search ourselves and do a better job on recruiting through the school system and your workforce. If you come in as a truck driver, offer incentive that we're offering schooling for mechanics. After work, if you want to participate in your schooling, then you can be promoted to that mechanic. We got to look within ourselves because we need jobs here in the city. It's no sense in outsourcing these jobs to people who don't stay in the city. And I feel that the recruiting system, you come to the second ward and recruit, I guarantee you, you'll get some workers, you'll get some employment. And if we want to cut down on crime, people need jobs in the city of St. Louis. And we have a city that we can be proud of. And when a person tells me, no, I don't want to work in the city of St. Louis, that hurts me. But let's start recruiting within ourselves. Tuesday morning when it snowed, with below temperature, zero below temperatures, I had grown adults knocking on the door, wanting to work to shovel snow. So if these same people want to shovel snow, I'm quite sure they can pick up our trash. So let's look within ourselves, recruit from within ourselves, and bring these people along. And I would like to comment, Alderman from the 19th Ward, Ms. Davis. I appreciate what you said. It made a lot of sense. And thanks again.
No, committeeman is also the committeeman. But committeeman, so we sat here today and we had the police chief, we had the director of public safety in here, and what the judge was saying was that Local 73 and them, that they're out in the schools, they're trying to recruit, they're trying to make the fire department more diverse, but they're not getting the applicants that they need. I mean, I'm trying to listen to what everybody has to say, and they're in here today telling us because they need to they want to diversify more in the fire department, that they've got, I guess, an academy class going in right now that is, my assumption from what I heard, I could be wrong, is entirely white. And am I right on that? Just curious. Okay, I thought they may know. But what I was hearing from him today is we need more diversity, and that even they're out in the schools and they're trying to get guys from in the city and they're not getting them. So they're in a catch-22 also. They want to see it more diverse. And in this case, it was the fire department. But they're saying that they're not having luck in there. Now, I don't know. You know, I don't know the answer. I'm just so you know, we're getting input from like all over everywhere. And if you get the opportunity, certainly as a committee man, I wish you would take the opportunity to talk to the public safety director and kind of see what they're saying to us too, because certainly you're elected, you're honorable in front of your name. I'm just telling you from what I'm gathering, it seems like if we're going to be more diverse, we may have to reach outside. And that's all I'm saying. I don't know that
Response. I'm referring to pretty much
I agree.
City, the street departments, the forestry departments and what.
Right.
And I understand what you're saying.
I agree, but we're getting a little bit of feedback. Anyway, does anyone have any questions?
And thanks again.
God bless, thank you so much. Last but not least.
Thank you.
Looks like Rio Gray, maybe? Reverend, okay, Reverend Darla Gray.
Let me see what you're.
I'm reading this, it's hard to read.
Reverend Daryl Gray.
Well, yeah, you know it now because they said it.
No, you didn't.
No, they said it, and then you
That
know
is not an indictment on the educational system, that's just bad writing.
No, that is very small. And
First
I
of
got
all,
cataracts.
Mr. Chairman,
Anyway,
thank you.
Reverend, I'm sorry.
That's okay, thank you very much. I realize I was the last one coming in, and so I appreciate the opportunity to say a couple of things. I know it's late. I want to say, first of all, I do live in the city of St. Louis. I moved here 2 years ago from Atlanta, so I came here. I came here because I wanted to come here. My wife, on the other hand, wants to move to Chesterfield. There you go. She's sitting right over there. She has a job in Chesterfield. She says it's easier for her. She says it's easier for her to travel. We live in Alderman Kennedy's ward. It's a great ward. We have a great alderman. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to live anywhere else. I'll talk to my wife later on. She wants to go to Chesterfield.
You might be in trouble.
Well, the reality is this. I don't believe that, I don't support allowing city employees to live outside the city. I moved into the city. I could have moved anywhere else in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, any other county, but I chose to be in the city. I live 1 block north of Delmar. And on that 1 block, I can't get a pizza delivered to my house. That 1 block north of Delmar, I can't get a pizza delivered. I think there's a tremendous incentive for city employees that work in the city of St. Louis, and that's a job. It's a job. And my wife and I were talking back there, and she's a senior vice president for human resources for a global corporation, and she's responsible for thousands of people. And we talked about it, the reality of having a job. I know that the personnel director is more informed about the level of unemployment in the city, but at one point, the unemployment rate for African Americans in the city of St. Louis was around 13.3%. That's African Americans in this city, about 13.3%, compared to whites in the city, which was probably about 8.4, 8.3, 8.4%. We've done much better in the city of St. Louis over the years. Our unemployment rates have gone down, but for African Americans, the unemployment rate hasn't changed that much. And so people have an incentive, a great incentive. They have a job. And I do agree that including incentives, more incentives, more benefits would encourage people to come to St. Louis to work. I'm a simple preacher. I'm a very simple preacher. You talked about us fishing in the same pond. You're right, but if we would feed our fish better.
Or stock the pond.
Well, when we stock the pond, sometimes we don't know what we're getting. When we have our pond that we've cultivated, when we've cultivated our own pond, then we know what's in our pond. When you bring fish in, you don't know you might bring a fish in that might eat other fish. I don't know. I'm just saying that we should always work from within. See, everybody wants to live in a better place. Everybody. I don't care who you are, black, white, brown, yellow, red, male, female. Everybody wants to live in a better place, but there are a lot of people who can't. They can't go anywhere else. They just can't. I stay because I think there's potential here. I believe that, I like to think that some of you have a concern with a comment that we have a distinct set of people to choose from. Because when I heard that, we have a limited amount of people to choose from. We have a resource pool, a work pool that doesn't meet standard. But then that's an indictment on us. That's an indictment on our city. When we have a resource pool, a workforce, or a work pool that doesn't meet the standards, the minimum standards that we need for entry-level jobs. So for, be it trimming trees, hauling trash, or whatever. We're not necessarily talking about police, and I'm going to talk a little bit faster. It's our failure within the city. It's the city's failure. My problem with employees leaving is so much that we take out of the city when we allow civil servants, public servants, city employees to leave. You take sales tax, you take property tax, you take a brain trust out. You take energy, you take initiative, you take so much, it's not just a monetary resource that you're taking out of the city, you're taking so much out. And so we're saying that that's okay. Take that resource somewhere else. It's okay to make a living in St. Louis, but not live in St. Louis. That's not okay. And if we allow city employees to do it, when we start talking about perception, then what are we saying? That the people that benefit the most from the city, that they want to run, and somebody mentioned white flight. I don't know if it's white flight, green flight, whatever flight. And you'll look at the statistics. But most folk who do leave the city, the large percentage are white. And that's not just St. Louis. That's most urban areas in the country. White residents who leave the city to move somewhere else, be it firemen, fishermen, doesn't matter. That's the reality. Those are the stats. And so, and why do they leave? Why are they leaving? It's not just about services. It's black fright produces white flight, which produces urban blight. That becomes the other reality. And so, finally, I said I wouldn't go. My wife told me not to be long because she hasn't eaten yet. She wants to go home. In our ward, in Alderman Kennedy's ward, not Chesterfield. Talk to her later. If an employee's family, if an employee has to be here in St. Louis, that means their family has to be here in St. Louis. If your family is here, wherever your family is, your treasure. Where your treasure is, there's your heart. My family is my treasure, which means if I'm going to live in this city, I'm going to make sure that the schools are better. If I have children living in the city, if I'm a city employee, I'm going to make sure that services are better. If my family is living in the city, I'm going to make sure that my neighborhood is safer and that I get involved. What we're doing, let's hold us accountable. Let's hold us accountable. I think the incentives are fine, but I think that we have the tail wagging the dog if we say incentives first and think that people might choose to come to the city when other municipalities are giving incentives for them to stay in those municipalities. And so anyway, I I would hopefully, prayerfully suggest that we give this a lot more thought. Finally, somebody said, well, why not let the people decide? Man, I've seen too many ballot initiatives where actually people don't decide, money decides. Special interest decides, not the population, but just a certain small group of people who have more money and maybe a better political machine. They get to decide. But anyway, I'm just a country preacher.
Reverend Gray, this does have to go before the voters. It's a change to the charter.
Gosh darn it. Well, I guess we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we do.
Yes, we do.
Any questions for the Reverend? Reverend, God bless. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you.
I actually have a question for Alderwoman Davis. Yeah, I do. And I could be way off base on what my thoughts are. But didn't you?
Through everybody.
We have gotten through everyone. And my question is real quick and simple. Didn't you help host the BUD program, the work fair? Or am I dreaming that?
Oh, I did a job fair for NGA project, yes.
Right. Who said they weren't called? You didn't sign it then? Did you sign this sheet?
Let him go ahead and speak first.
We're gonna let you speak, but did you sign the sheet?
Oh, that's another sheet, okay.
Where'd you find that sheet? Right here. Somehow we didn't see the other sheet. So, I mean, I'm just saying, Reverend, I was just,
It's in there.
it's just gonna be the one name. But let me finish with, Reverend, so we are making that effort, and Alderwoman Davis did host the employment fair, and.
Well, the unions had talked about how they couldn't find people.
Right.
And
So they had
I
the
knew
BUD-
they were out there.
The BUD program.
Not BUD, it's not BUD. It wasn't the BUD program. That's something different under Slate. But I showed them if you go where people are, if you message the way they message, they will come. We did not spend 1 quarter on advertising. Not 1 quarter. It was so many people showing up, we had to have traffic control. And they were happy and want to do it again.
Do you know what the result was?
We had 547 people show up.
How many got hired?
And on the spot that day, 90-something got hired.
So.
But they had to come back. They all got attached to somebody. So the plumbers, pipe fitters have got their people. The electricians got their people. The carpenters got their people. The MSD folks got their people. Everybody
Right, so
got
was it,
attached.
so the unions all.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But they didn't have to live in the city, though.
Well, not necessarily, but I would
Well,
guarantee
they were
you
from-
that the majority of people, and we went through the analysis, close to 70% of the people came from the city of St. Louis. The other part to that, too, is most of them even knew somebody else that they wanted to bring into that process with them and were offered that opportunity. So, and we've done other fairs as well, and I do it with private businesses. I'm doing a job fair somewhere all the time, and so people get hired on the spot. We got plenty of folks to qualify for these jobs.
Right, and I knew that, that's why I just wanted you to bring that up.
May I
to
say something
we
else
are
real
working,
quickly? If
sure.
you don't mind, I'll do it 1 minute or
Oh,
less.
that's fine. Quickly, and then we got to have.
Yes, sir, I'll do it 1 minute or less.
Okay.
The knowledge that we have, we should not have any excuses for people being unemployed in the city of St. Louis. I know that because here, people are walking up to us every day, and they show us where they've applied, and they've never gotten a response. This is every day. We've all got those phone calls. We all have those conversations. And so we just got to do some things a little bit different. And I know it can be done. I've been through this process over the years. I was responsible for 32 counties in the state of Missouri, hiring over 6,000 people with 32 different sites, keeping them maintained, keeping those sites up and running the EEOC and all. I know what can be done. I know the talent is here, and we have got to find a better way to do what we do. I'm excited about the new opportunities at Slate and how they're actually doing the job a different way. And so their results, their numbers are going up. I'm done.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, last and not least, Mr. Johnson, I appreciate everybody hanging out like they did all night.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank
Yes.
you. I did request an amendment possibly to this bill to exclude the first responders from the residency requirement because there's a difference between hiring a secretary, a tree trimmer, or whatever, as opposed to hiring someone that requires trust or possibly is responsible for taking a life, like a police officer. And I think that would be more likely if you were to exclude the first responders from this bill. It will be a better chance of passage. Yes, it is fair because the job is actually different. The job of taking a life is different than the job of typing on a computer. I don't find, let's say, financial assistance as an alternative to removing the bill. I think financial motivation could help, but it's not good enough as a requirement. And I don't think this city, which is broke, according to Lydia Cruz, could afford it. So.
So you did send a message?
Email.
Okay, very good.
Yes, I just summarized, well, so.
Okay, well, thank you. So, oh, did you want to say something? I'm sorry. So, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. I would say at the next meeting, whenever the chairman of the bill decides that meeting will be the sponsor of the bill, we will not be doing public testimony at that one. I would say at that next meeting, we'll either vote this thing in or out of committee, either which way. It'll probably be a daytime meeting, versus an evening meeting. We did this evening one because we wanted people to have the opportunity. We made sure the parking lot was open for free parking. We made sure that entrance was accessible so everybody could come in and out. So just kind of, unless there's some reason, I think we pretty much understand, plus keep in mind we're getting a lot of emails and phone calls on this. So anyway, I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. I appreciate this committee, which shows up to everything. I mean, we got a great committee that never worry about quorums. So I would actually move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
And thank everyone for coming out.
Thank you.